Hello everybody, I'm Grandmaster Robert Hungaski and I'm going to be doing a lecture for you guys today. And in this lecture I'm going to be talking about some games, some of my games, some of my more recent games. Some of them not too bad, some of them terrible. But let's start easy and let's start with a game that I can actually explain what I did. And this is a game from the recently finished Continental Championship. It was held in the Dominican Republic just a couple weeks ago. Now, it's a tournament where I had a rocky start and an even rockier finish, but in the middle it seemed like things might turn out okay. And this was kind of like at my best moment, and it was a game that I was playing with white against a talented young player from Colombia who was having a phenomenal tournament so far. He had beaten a couple of GMs, a couple of draws, seemed on track for the GM norm. So it was a very dangerous game, and I decided to approach it cautiously with the move knight f3. So move knight f3, I remember when I was my opponent's age, around 16 or so, was the move that annoyed me the most because it's the most flexible, the one that reveals the least information. So, I haven't really made it clear to black how far my d pawn is going to go. Is this going to be a queen pawn? Is it going to be a ready in English? If c5, I might even still transpose back to king pawn. So the interesting thing about knight f6 is that if you're a d4 player, it's a nice backdoor to a lot of queen pawn positions without all the queen pawn theory. For example, you avoid most of the Indian defenses. For example, the Grunfeld is kind of out, right? If you go bishop g7, I will allow a king's Indian. So, if you don't like playing against the king's Indian, you basically should never be playing d4. And if you're a d4 player, facing the king's Indian should seem like Christmas every time. So the king's Indian, okay, that's fine. Grunfeld is out, that's huge. Another big one, Nimzo-Indian, right? So now, this is actually how the game went. I played g3, and if you're a Nimzo-Indian player, you're just hitting thin air if you play bishop b4. So knight f3 is a great way of avoiding the Grunfeld, the Nimzo-Indian, the Benoni, the Benko gambit. I mean, all of these nightmare openings that are just labyrinths within themselves. So it's a very practical way of playing. Now, of course, black, instead of playing knight f6, could go d5. And as a knight f3 player, this is, what you look at as the most serious challenge, because I remember many years ago, I played at a Blitz tournament in Philadelphia. It's like the World Open Blitz tournament. And I got paired against Wesley So. And I figured, hey, I'm going to play a nice, quiet game. I'm going to start with knight f3. And on move 2, I just felt like I was already getting put under pressure because he played this move d4. And usually the most challenging approaches by black against knight f3 are going to involve black saying, hey, you had your chance to play d4 and you let it pass you by. Now I'm going to take the reins of the game and I'm going to put a pawn on d4. So that thread is very important all throughout knight f3 and like ready in English opening. So by the way, that game, if I recall correctly, went g3, knight c6, bishop g2, e5, castle kingside, e4, and already I had no idea what was going on. I was like, well, this looks okay because I'll just go knight e1, threatening the pawn, and if he defends it with something like knight f6, I'll just keep chipping away at it, right? So perfect. Of course, black played h5 immediately, and after something like takes, h4, d3, bishop h3, followed by queen d7 castles. I would later come to find out this was actually all theory and it has been played. But it is not only just a tremendous variation for black, but also illustrative of some of the dangers that white faces in these seemingly safe openings where we're fianchettoing, right? The fianchetto, for all its virtues, has important vulnerabilities. Mainly, I would say there are three pillars that we need to knock down for the fianchetto to collapse. And that would be, number one, driving away the natural defender of the king side, so driving away the f3 knight. Once that's accomplished, taking advantage of the hook created by the g3 pawn, and lastly, trading off the light square bishops. I mean, if we can get those three things in there, then the fianchetto starts becoming more of a weakness than anything else. And we're going to talk about a couple of different concepts that we think of as strong, but that also have a downside, right? So the fianchetto is definitely one of those structures. So most of the time, when I see the move d5, I'll seriously consider saying, hey, I've avoided all the in defenses. I'm going to take that as a moral win, and I will deal with d4, d5 openings in a more traditional way. In any case, my opponent did play knight f6, and after c4, played e6. So still kind of hopeful that I'll play d4, which didn't happen. And now after g3, d5, bishop g2. Again, another very ready kind of moment, because I could simply transpose back to queen pawn and play a Catalan with d4, but this opens me up to another wave of theory, right? And puts my opponent in a privileged situation where he gets to choose the course of the game now. Because, okay, aside from all the d takes c4 lines, which I mean is just, there's so much. I mean, black can play with c6 and b5, with knight c6, with knight d7, with bishop d7, bishop c6, depending on whether white goes queen a4 or not. The bishop can go to e7 or b4. I mean, you really need to know what you're doing, and I'm not really a specialist. And also, recently I've been getting a lot of games as black against the Catalan, and I've been exploring this move bishop b4 check, and I think it's just great. So very interesting. So I didn't want to go into that, so I just played bishop g2. And the point is, if you do go bishop e7 now, then I will play d4. Because after d4, now d takes c4 loses a little bit of its luster, because you've included the moves bishop e7, bishop g2, which I think is pretty clear white is going to feel happier about than black. And now, for example, if, well, simply queen a4, queen takes c4 has to be fine. These types of positions, you have to be very careful as black, right? You don't want to start clearing this diagonal, because this bishop gets progressively stronger as black pawns begin to disappear along this diagonal. Ideally, we just want to leave black with a pawn on b7. So we won't really talk about Catalan structures in this lecture, but I will be doing it in my next lecture, because I think it's so rich that you really have to tackle it head on. But this was the type of Catalan that I was willing to go into. But now my opponent reverts back to this thread, right? I think this very important attitude that black needs to have. And that is to say, okay, enough of these move order tricks and this ambiguity, let's define what's really going to happen, like what kind of a game we're going to have. And my opponent goes for it. He plays d4. And after d4, castles, c5, e3. I'm going to make these next couple of moves kind of quickly, because they've been played many, many times. And I think after d3, I'll just take a quick peek here. Yeah, it says 805 games in this position. And that's just the Lichess database. I'm sure maybe Mega database might have, I don't know, twice as many games. But anyway, this is a topical position. And I remember many years ago, this series of opening books came out. I think it was like Play Knight F3 like Kramnik. And it was written by Alexander Halifman. And the books were just like amazing for the time. Like I built my entire Knight F3 repertoire just by doing exactly what the book said. And back then, that kind of an approach worked pretty well. And I learned a lot about Knight F3. And I thought certain positions in Knight F3 didn't look too great. And this was one of them. I thought this was just a very comfortable position for black. And I was worried that people would start targeting what I saw as this weakness in that repertoire. So I kind of dropped Knight F3 for a while. And was really worried about going from solid to passive. There's a very fine line, and I tended to fall off that cliff. So I wasn't liking that. And I started playing this with black because it's a very dynamic, ambitious way of playing against an otherwise very solid opening without really taking on that much risk. So my latest understanding until maybe last year was that this move was very popular. And I remember I had some trouble dealing with the move bishop e7 for a while. I think white was playing something like knight or a3, a5, knight d2, castles, and after rook e1. I remember losing very convincingly in a game where my opponent played knight e8, the simple idea of going f6 and e5. And this is going to be the main thread of the game throughout this structure, because essentially what we have here is a reversed Benoni structure. If we talk about Benoni structures, it's useful to know what the Benoni is. It's an opening that black usually plays, or not so usually anymore, against queen pawn. I think it's probably like the most reckless, ambitious way of playing against d4. It's just like, whatever, let's get it over with. Like, you're just going for first round knockout type of thing. Usually if you're a Benoni player and the game is dragging on and on and on, that's a bad sign. So I say this because I love the Benoni. I'm going to keep playing it, of course. But you have to be able to withstand some punishment. The games you win are a lot of fun. The games you lose just make you not want to play the Benoni anymore, that's for sure. But it's a fascinating structure. I mean, it's been played by Bobby Fischer against Spassky in their 72 match. I mean, Tal played it quite often. And you see it every now and then. I mean, there's some 2700 players that use it sometimes. But it's essentially an outrageous opening. So the Benoni structure, I mean, there's so many ways that white could play it, but just for the sake of comparison, right? This would be your typical Benoni structure where black has gone through great pains to create an asymmetrical position, right? Now black has this 3 against 2 on the queen side, and white is going to have this 2 against 1 in the center. So white's going to try to break with e5, and black's going to try to break with b5. And we're just going to be swinging wildly at each other throughout this whole time. Now, in the position we got in the game, right, after here, there are some key differences, right? Being reversed, we have a Benoni with an extra tempo, but also this bishop is inside the pawn chain instead of outside. That's not a big deal. Like, it's not a game changer in the Benoni. In fact, this game I was just referencing with bishop e7, castles, usually after knight e8, f6, e5, you don't know if the bishop's coming to f5. It might go to e6, it might go to g4. So I don't really remember why people stopped playing bishop e7, but there's some ideas. I mean, white can play knight a3, knight c2, white can play rook. Actually, very interesting is to play rook e1 and after castles, knight e5 and start clearing the diagonal for the bishop. And this is an interesting concept, variations aside, because it's going to be what determines the character of the game from now on. I mean, this Benoni structure basically means that we have a game that's about space, right? When black plays this ambitious move d4, black is saying, I'm grabbing the space. I'm going to play with a space advantage. I'm going to have more space than you, and that implies something very important, which is that this game is going to be about minor pieces. That's what a space advantage is all about. I mean, don't let anybody fool you. The only thing that matters, and the only thing that determines whether a space advantage is good or bad, are the minor pieces. If you have space, you want to restrict your opponent's minor pieces. Therefore, you don't want to trade them off. You want your opponent to feel cramped with them and not have good squares to place those pieces in, right? And that's what black's strategy is. Black wants to overrun us, kind of like how Wesley So overran me in that blitz game. Well, that's what this is. That's the tug of war that's going to be going on in this game. So let's just move forward a couple of moves. My opponent chooses this move bishop d6. And hopefully this little detour I took is going to make it easier to understand the move bishop g5. Because this pawn on d4 is a threat to my minor pieces. The last thing I would want, for example, let's say if I go a3, just desperately gasping for air here with b4, black's going to go a5, let's say, knight bd2, castles, rook e1, e5. I'm making, by the way, terrible moves for white, even though they look kind of natural. This is not how you should play the Benoni if you can avoid it, but it's usually what's going to happen. And let's say I go bishop g4. So I'm having a very hard time figuring out what the future of this bishop is going to be. At the same time, this knight on f3 is blocking my bishop on g2, and it's not so easy to remove it, because if I go something like knight e4, then after knight takes, rook takes, it starts becoming pretty clear that black is going to beat me to it. Black is going to play e4 sooner than I'm going to play b4, let alone create any kind of a threat, right? So if something like rook e1, queen f6, rook e8, and e4 are coming, and this is pretty much a Benoni massacre, right? So the game is probably over by then. So that's what we want to avoid. Like if I have to fall into that kind of position, I'm out. I don't want to play this line. But it turns out that this extra tempo that I have allows me to play this move, and it's the most liberating move in the Benoni. When you get, let's say it's black, when you get to trade off that bishop, you feel like, oh, okay, at least it's not going to be terrible, right? I'm always going to have room. So that's exactly how white's going to feel after trading these bishops. And not only that, let's say here, I think we included a3, a5, or no, it was knight bd2 first. And now if black's not careful and allows me to trade off another set of minor pieces, now it's not just relief. Now we're in control as white, because after, let's say, a3, a5, after the move knight d2, we have a dream Benoni. We've traded off two sets of minor pieces. We have perfect harmony between the knight and the bishop. Nobody's getting in anybody's way. Not only that, the rook's going to come to e1 beautifully. The other rook's going to come to c1, and it's going to support c5, and then I'll play knight c4. And it's like all of the pieces are just going to be dancing around each other without really ever bumping into each other. And that's just what you want in chess in general. But in these Benoni structures, when that happens, it's almost like everything, like a Tetris game where everything falls perfectly into place. So this is what we're aiming for. Therefore, black plays queen e7, okay, a3, a5, so that after knight e4, black can play bishop c7 and say, hey, enough of these trades. Now your knight is going to pay the price, because my next moves are going to be castles, e5, maybe bishop g4, f5, rook e8, and e4, right? Just as a kind of rough sketch of the position, that's what it's going to look like. So, you know, it might have been a bit impulsive of me to bring my knight to e4 unless I knew for sure that I would get to trade that bishop off. Now, I have to confess, I had actually played this position before. I was mentioning earlier, last year, but I was playing with black. And I was convinced black was doing great in this line. That's why I stopped playing it as white. I mean, the engine says it's good, and then there were some, I think, repertoire books that threw out a couple of good lines. And I think they mentioned the move b4 here as white's most challenging move. And then I looked at it and I was like, that's not such a big deal. So I started playing it with black. And I played against a very strong player, Grandmaster from Argentina. And he actually played this move against me. And I'd never seen this move before. It didn't really make that much sense to me. But I just played g5, which is obviously the move white wants you to play. And then he went back, and we played like this normal-looking Benoni, and all of a sudden, when I castled, white played h4, and I was in trouble. And I got a losing position out of the opening. I somehow won that game. But it really got me thinking that I misunderstood this position. Like it's not nearly as easy as I thought for black. So I started taking a closer look. And I wasn't crazy about knight h4. Later I saw some pretty convincing ways of playing against it. But the move I really loved here was this move c5. It's just a beautiful little move. Because it's so pure to the main thread, like the structure that's present in the game. What is the idea of c5? The idea is to pursue this trade. Trading minor pieces is so important that I'll give you this pawn, right? That's kind of radical because it seems like it's a very important pawn. It's what creates this asymmetric structure. But it's going to be worth it. After, let's say black just goes for it right away. It's not the best move, but it's not the worst move. So let's say we get to this position, and this is the harmony that I'm looking for. The knight and bishop, this is their ideal arrangement. The rooks are coming to e1 and c1. Actually, not having a c-pawn might be a better thing, because now I have this pressure against the knight on c6. And my knight is coming to c4 and e5, and my queen can come to b3 and b6 maybe. Everything starts falling into place very quickly. So that's what I loved about this position, and that's kind of, where I was coming from. So my opponent castled, and I made rook e1. I know this is happening, right? So I'm never worried about my pawn or anything. And now after rook b8, I played rook c1. By the way, I think, oh no, I'm sorry, I played knight d2 first, rook b8, and now rook e1, not rook c1. So I'm just getting closer and closer to my setup, right? All it's missing is my rook on c1, and I know that knight's coming to d6. And if black's not careful, my other knight's going to come to c4, and it's not going to be so easy. You're not even going to get a pawn now, because I'm going to have that incredibly strong knight. And there are actually some fascinating games in the database. You'll see white do some serious damage in this position. So I was very happy with the outcome of the opening, and as I was looking deeper and deeper into the position, I started to really appreciate where white is coming from here. Like this harmony among the minor pieces is, as we'll see, stronger than it looks. So my opponent plays b5, and his idea is actually quite logical, because if I don't take this pawn, then I've lost control over the c4 square. Black seems actually to be pretty well set up on the queen side, And black can start looking at ideas of b4, maybe bishop a6. Seems like a pretty reasonable game. I mean, I have to take on b6. And now after rook takes, the point of this is that, okay, b2 is hanging, and now the move knight c4 just seems irresistible, right? So, I mean, it defends b2, it attacks b6, puts the knight on an outpost. It's a bad move because after rook b8, okay, we've defended b2, but we've actually disrupted the harmony among our pieces. Why? Because first of all, when the rook comes to c1, now it's going to be running into the knight. And secondly, we did nothing to correct the position of the knight on e4. So instead of fixing one problem, we created another one, and now we have two. So that's how you get tangled up in a position and you start playing sloppy. So we have to kind of resist this urge to play the obvious move. In fact, I play the move that I think is the best move here, which is rook c1. And I defend the b2 pawn indirectly, because if you take on b2, I'm just going to take on c6. And most importantly, instead of putting a knight on c4, I want to put a knight on c5. This knight on c5 is going to be much more aggressive than the knight on c4. Sure, a bit more unstable, but hey, that's the name of the game in the Benoni. So the knight's coming to c5, which is going to open up the position for the bishop. And as we'll see, being deeper into black's position than, let's say, a knight on c4, it's going to provide all these interesting tactical ideas. So black plays knight e5, right? Kind of gets the knight off the hook, threatens rook takes b2, threatens knight takes d3. This can be defended pretty easily here. The move queen c2, also hitting the bishop on c7. And now, after bishop b8, my master plan is complete, right? Look at this position. Everything is doing great. Everything is optimized without really stepping on anybody's toes. So here, I think black started to realize the position was a lot harder than it looked. And already there are some threats floating around that aren't obvious. And after the move rook d8, black's position is losing by force. So this is kind of an interesting moment because this is it. I mean, white's position has been wound as tightly as possible, right? And, one more crank and the jack in the box has to pop up. So when you can't optimize your position anymore, that's when you need to look for tactics. And, it could be a very hard tactic. I think in this case, it is a pretty hard tactic, or it could be very easy. But the process for finding them is usually the same. You have to scan the board for active moves, right? Like, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is to all of a sudden fixate on a move and just run with it as far as you can. Like, I'm going to try to calculate the move f4 10 moves in advance. Like f4, knight g4, f5, like, that's sloppy calculation. And what if it doesn't work? Then you have to start from scratch with another move. So you have to scan the board for your most active moves, right? Your checks, your captures, and your threats. So yes, you would look at a move like f4, but you would also look at moves like knight a4, rook takes e5, even if they don't work, or knight c4, right? All of these moves, or maybe knight, b3 coming after this pawn. So all of these moves make a lot of sense because, it asks the question to black, like, okay, what are you going to do about this? And if you have a scatter plot of pieces, it's usually going to be very hard to solve those problems. So, rook takes e5 seems pretty obvious not to work. Just bishop takes, and what am I doing? But I'm not gonna throw these ideas in the trash, right? Something that's not good right now might be good later. So it's an idea that's floating around. f4, I would really be upset with myself, because far from trying to increase the pressure on my opponent's poorly coordinated pieces, I'm just sort of luring them to incredible squares, right? So I'm really just helping black. So that move is out. And this move, I would much rather play rook takes e5 than f4, right? So that move, I'm very close to throwing it in the dustbin. Knight b3, I remember, was a move I actually looked at during the game, because I was like, how do you defend that pawn on a5? I'll just go knight takes a5, b4, and the game is over. But actually, you can defend that pawn very easily with queen a7. And the queen's actually fine on a7. In fact, maybe black might play a4 or bishop d6, and things are getting kind of messy. Maybe rook b5. So black's position will fall into place if I give him enough time. Knight c4, just trading off the knight, doesn't seem to make sense. Maybe I'll even blunder b2. So then I got around to looking at this move, knight a4. Because now the rook has to move. The rook doesn't have a lot of squares. And it seems like not only the only square, but actually a pretty good square is b5. This is kind of like strange, like the queen on a7 was actually a good square for the queen. Well, b5 is actually a pretty good square for the rook too. Gets a lot done. Defends a5, covers c5, covers b8, e5. You get a lot of bang for your rook there. So I also want to be careful, right? I don't want to play a move like decentralize my knight if it's going to improve the position of my opponent's rook. It just doesn't make sense. But sometimes, just because it's a threat, part of you is like, oh, maybe he'll miss it, and you have this impulse to do it. And in this case, if you do it, you have to justify it with a variation. It's okay to break the rules as long as you have a good reason, right? And here there is a very good reason, and that is the move queen takes c8. After rook takes, king h7, now I have rook takes b8. And after rook takes b8, rook takes e5. And I mean, what happened, right? This was actually all forced. So I don't know, so far we're maybe like 4 moves into the sequence, but it was all with checks or captures. And the strange thing about this position is just evaluating it, right? Like if you have to go back here, right? I know I don't want to play knight a4, rook b5, unless I have some tactic, right? The only tactic I have there is queen takes c8. So I'm sacking my queen and then taking on b8. Hopefully all that's forced. Hopefully there's no in-between move, knight takes d3 at some point. Right? So that's kind of a question that I have to answer as well. But then let's say black goes into all of this, and we get that knight on a4, rook on e5, 3 minor pieces for the queen. Then we have to, we're not going to calculate our way through that. We have to rely on an instinct that's telling us whether that is good for us or not. And again, it all comes down to harmony, right? Because when you see the knight on a4, the rook on e5, the bishop on g2, and this knight on d2 about to come to c4, and you see this pawn on a5, and you see this rook that doesn't have an open file, right? And it's not going to have an open file either. Then you start to get a feeling of momentum in white's position. And usually when you have that feeling, it's that the levee's broken and you're completely dominating your opponent's position. And this is actually what happened, right? After knight a4, takes, this is a winning position for white already. Threatening a5, so black plays queen d8, and now knight c4, right? And black plays rook c8 here. So black is understandably just playing for one-shot, knockout tactics, because the long game is not going to be good. I mean, here if I go rook takes a5, then I'm just losing after rook takes e4. I don't have rook a8 because of rook c1. And if knight takes a5, this is a move that would concern me, because it feels like we've been on the thread of the game and then we just let go, right? So once you identify the thread of the game, you have to think of it like as riding a mechanical bull. Like you have to stay focused and on until the last minute, because if you get distracted, you're off. And that's when bad things can happen. For example, here maybe rook c1, bishop f1, queen f6, and the rook moves away, queen f3, and now I'm losing. So I still need to keep my grip on the position. And that means that pawns aren't really what this game is about. Here, it's about domination, right? It's about making sure that these two very dangerous pieces are kept under lock and key. So the move here is knight b6, right? Hitting the rook. Rook goes back, right? Black would love to take here. And now just rook b5. Defending the knight, just maintaining the position. And of course, this pawn is always a target, right? My opponent here played f5 in order to activate the queen. And there's really not that much to do. I mean, a4, probably rook b4, and that's not going to help. So the game continued. a4, fixing the pawn, but also defending my rook. There were some tricks, for example here, with a4 that I can't take on a4 because my rook is hanging. And actually during the game, I was much more concerned with a4 than f5. Because my main idea is to get rid of the a5 pawn and push my passer. And this kind of sets me back more than f5. So I think here black missed his best chance for counterplay, because if he sees that my main thread, my main idea is to incorporate this pawn as sort of like the guy that's going to win the game for me, then you can tell that a4 is really the move. I don't know, during the game, what was I going to do? I think, there was this bishop c6 idea. That's right. It was kind of interesting, because now if queen c7, there was this move rook c5. And you can't take on b6 because of bishop e4 check. So I get to untangle my pieces a very nice way. And now, of course, I will take this pawn and then just go b4, b5. And all of my pieces are just dominating too. So yeah, bishop c6 was the move. My opponent, like I said, played f5, and after a4, queen g5, rook takes a5. So queen c1 and bishop f1. Okay, I mean, black has accomplished something here. He activated the queen, sort of got it behind enemy lines, and kind of messed up my bishop a little bit, right? I don't want my bishop there, but the bishop does make sure that nothing bad happens to this d3 pawn, which means that nothing bad will happen to this knight on c4, which means that nothing bad will happen to the knight on b6. And now his idea is actually to achieve some harmony himself. Why not? For example, I'm just going to make a move that really indulges what black is trying to do. Right? Imagine something like this. Here, 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 here. This was one variation that I remember seeing during the game, right? As a possible illustration of things I shouldn't do. So that seemed like an interesting starting point for counterplay. Of course, this move rook b5, it's not very good. I played rook e5 in this position, which now after h4 allows me to play a5. And this is going to be different because after h takes g3, h takes g3. If black goes for that same idea with rook h8, the point is that I have rook takes e6. And you don't have king g6, and you don't have king g8, because then I'll just trade off the rook and promote the pawn. And you also don't have ideas like queen h6, because the rook's going to cover that square as well. So all of a sudden, this rook e5, rook takes e6 takes away that entire source of counterplay, which is already, very thin for black. So black played f4, which is a good try. Unfortunately, it just doesn't make it, right? Because if we just take the most direct approach, which is to go a6 and continue marching that pawn down the a file, after f takes g3, if I go f takes g3, this is the harmony that black is looking for, this coordination between rook and queen, and all of a sudden I lost this game, right? It's ridiculous. So the key is disrupting communication between these two pieces. And the way of doing that is by using black's own pawn against him, right? Because here, after g takes f3, of course I'm not going to go king takes f2, allowing rook f8, but instead I'll go king g2. And this pawn really is a hurdle that black can't overcome, right? And you're out of time. I'm threatening a8 or a takes b8. So black goes for the last shot, right? If I take the rook on b8, I get mated in 2 moves. That would be very sad. But I can take on g3, and after queen takes bishop g2, the rook is now also covering this source of counterplay. So this centralized rook, I remember, is it even fair to say like one of my favorite chess shows? There aren't that many. But Yermolinsky's Every Russian Schoolboy Knows. He has these lectures that are unbelievable and funny. And one of them is the rook, the best defender money can buy. And it's just so true. Like, I'd never thought of it that way. And this rook on e5, it's just holding everything together. And there's no fat in white's position. So that's kind of the beauty of it. Because here, the last shot is really rook f8. Because now, if I'm careless and promote, after check, king h2, check, bishop h3, here black has to be careful. Because if you go queen f2, then this queen is coming back to g2. And if you go queen f4, now queen g3, and forget about it, I'm down 3 pieces. And if you go rook f2, then I think I can just move my king back, because after queen g3, bishop g2, and the queen is also defended. And then my next move is going to be queen e4, no matter what you play. So it seems like, oh, maybe I just queen, right? Wrong, because black has this killer in-between move, queen f4, to disrupt the harmony, right? So this queen can't come back. Now, after king g2, just queen f1, and I'm hitting you on these dark squares, and you just can't escape the checks. Wait a minute, is that right? Here, queen f4, king h1. Oh, ooh, okay, I have this check. That's what I was missing. All right, and then you make it back. Right, because king here, that's the pattern, huh? Okay, there we go. I had to work it out. So a8, great way to ruin a great game. Just if you're going for all-out greatness. But the key move here is rook h5. So after rook h5, the king has to move, and now the rook drops back to h3. And the point is that now you don't have check on h4, right? And after, let's say, queen e1, king h2, you don't have any more checks, actually, because the e5 square is covered. I'm promoting. There's always a check here. The rook like did its job on e5, and then it drops back even more and just starts taking care of business. So great example of the best defender money can buy. In the game, black played queen f2, right? So maybe, oh, this was actually kind of funny. So my opponent really fought till the very end, because here if I go king h2, there was a cute variation that went queen f4, and now you think, ah, oh, check, and I'll promote next. And after king h5, you promote, and let's say, you take, and now king h4, and don't you have egg on your face, right? You might even win this as black, I don't know. So the key move is king h1, and after king h1, he resigned, because the only check left is queen e1, and after king h2, again, no more checks. So anyway, I was actually pretty happy with this game, but I liked it because it was able to illustrate some fundamental ideas that involve, space and harmony. So anyway, thanks for listening.